Great. We are delighted to be joined by Yasmine Sherif of Education Cannot Wait. Yasmine holds the enviable title of most interesting remote briefing when you briefed us last from an airport hall, I think in Islamabad. So we're happy to have you here in person to talk about Ukraine and I think as well Afghanistan. Please.
Thank you. This one, right?
Yeah,
it's on. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you so much for having Education Cannot Wait, which is the United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crisis, back again. Thank you, Stefan, for that. Let me first start by expressing and joining the international community our, I would say, condemnation and also sorrow for the attack against two schools and learning centers in Afghanistan yesterday, the first in Mumtaz Tuition Center and in Abdul Rahim Shahid High School in Western Kabul, Afghanistan. And our heart cries out for the families, to those affected. We don't have exact figures. Reportedly, 9 school children were killed and reportedly 50 children were injured. So our heart goes out to them. And we call for respect of international law and the Safe School Declaration. I started my career in Afghanistan in 1990. And today, it has gone from bad to worse. Nothing is getting better in that country, and it is on the verge of a humanitarian collapse. So I really hope that all UN member states come together for the long-suffering people of Afghanistan. Close to 24 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Girls are going back to primary school, and we are cautiously optimistic that secondary schools for girls will also open very soon. We will not give up until every girl is back to school, and boys, of course. Now I will move on to the mission to Moldova that Education Cannot Wait conducted last week together with the United States, USAID, United Kingdom, FCDO, their word, the UN High Commissioner for Refugee, the Refugee Agency, UNICEF hosted the mission, and civil society representatives. We met with the Minister of Education, we met with the education advisor to the President, and we obviously met with the refugees and the refugee children in Moldova. And we decided, Education Cannot Wait, as a global fund, to add to the $5 million that we recently, in emergency support for education, recently committed to Ukraine in the midst of the armed conflict. And now we also announced an additional initial $1.5 million in emergency support for education to refugee children and youth in Moldova. And I say initial because we do not know what the situation will look like in the near future, given the geographical location of Moldova and what might happen. So we also have to have a contingent planning and keep monitoring the situation, because there might, and we hope it will not happen, but there might be a second flow of refugees. The total of $6.5 million that Education Cannot Wait has contributed to the Ukraine crisis and the refugees in Moldova, which is possible thanks to our critically important strategic donor partners and private sector and foundations, will go to first of all, above all, psychosocial support and mental health. We met with refugee children and their mothers who were absolutely traumatized by the journey. Met with one mother who had fled, taken the only family car from Odessa and fled with her 2 daughters across the border, leaving her husband and her mother behind in Odessa, only for the sake of security, safety, and education for her children. So it shows how they prioritize education and safety and security. All goes hand in hand. And when we spoke with them, the mother broke down and the girls looked very traumatized. There are 50,000 children like that, refugee children, in Moldova. And as you know, Moldova is the poorest country in Europe, and with the refugees accounting for nearly 4% of the Moldovan total population of 2.6 million. And yet the government of Moldova have shown an absolutely open door policy, been very generous in receiving refugee children, and also to integrate them in the national school system, which already before the attack and the conflict in Ukraine was already stretched, given the poverty of Moldova in general, and now on top of it receiving refugees fleeing for their life into Moldova. So the challenge here for the Moldovan government with this generosity is how to accommodate an additional 50,000 children into the school system. There are language barriers because Romanian is the official language, mostly spoken in Moldova. There is also a challenge of tracking the refugee children because 90% of them live in host communities, and so far only 1,800 children and youth have been officially registered and joined the public schools. And the reason that it's so difficult for the government to track them is because they were not prepared for this. Moldova never expected to be a host country for refugees fleeing in such a short span of time and so suddenly, and already with its own economic challenges. I think I should take this opportunity, though, because during the mission, the United States of America, USAID, announced an additional $18 million to Education Cannot Wait, the UN's global fund. For globally, we have invested in 42 crisis-affected and refugee-hosted countries. So they announced an additional $18 million, which makes the United States the third largest strategic donor to Education Cannot Wait. And the second largest is United Kingdom, who is also one of the founder of Education Cannot Wait. And the first is Germany, that just a couple of months ago announced $200 million, an additional 200 million euros, euros to Education Cannot Wait, and have contributed over $330 million in total. We are a fund of $1.1 billion today and hope to grow, because we are speaking about 130 million children left furthest behind in conflict, climate-induced disasters, and wars as refugees whose education has been disrupted. And without education in SDG 4, no other human rights or sustainable development goals can be achieved. That's the very foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. James?
Thank you very much for doing this. James Bays, Al Jazeera. My question is about Afghanistan. You said that you were cautiously optimistic about all of the girls' schools being reopened after, of course, they were going to reopen them last month and it was abandoned at the last minute. What gives you that optimism? And, I mean, I suppose it's a question linking with Ukraine. I mean, obviously the problems for the children from Ukraine are immense, but how worried are you that Afghanistan is getting completely overshadowed, and that the perhaps necessary pressure on the Taliban to change their attitudes to female education is not there because the world is looking at Ukraine?
Please.
Thank you. These are excellent questions. Thank you very much for asking them. First of all, when it comes to girls' secondary education in Afghanistan, we know, and there have been public announcements of that certain organizations like the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan and the Aga Khan Foundation have been able, through negotiations and with the work of religious scholars in certain parts of Afghanistan, negotiating at the district and provincial level, have been able to reopen secondary school. So at the local level, it's already happening. Now, your question is nationally. Well, as this much we know, is that there are proponents for girls' secondary education also within the Taliban leadership. And then there are those who have a more not human rights-based and gender-oriented approach to it, and we are hopeful that good will prevail here. But there are ongoing behind-the-scenes discussions. I led myself the first all-women mission to Afghanistan in October last year, and we met up with UNICEF in Afghanistan. And we met, of course, as we do in the United Nations, and have informal dialogues with the Taliban representation. And there were those who are really fighting for girls' education, not only in primary, they're all back, but in secondary, being fathers of daughters. So it's not a consensus that secondary girls should not go to school. And as United Nations, we always have to be optimistic. We always have to be that. We are paid for that. That's why we are in this job. And having worked in Afghanistan for many, many years, I hope that their culture, the beautiful culture, will prevail, and human rights and girls' rights. I hope it will come one day, inshallah, as they say. When it comes to Afghanistan being overshadowed by Ukraine, the United Kingdom convened together with Qatar and Germany the donor pledging conference in London just a few weeks ago, and I cannot recall if it was $2 to $3 billion that were actually being pledged. And so the UK has taken a very strong role, Germany a very strong role, Qatar a very strong role. And I have to say also the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Gordon Brown, who is also the chair of the high-level steering group of Education Cannot Wait, who was also a strong driving force behind that conference. So many of us are keeping, including member states of the United Nations, are keeping Afghanistan on top of the agenda, as do many UN agencies, such as UNICEF, OCHA, UNHCR. I think the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, was only there a couple of weeks ago. We will not let Afghanistan go. But, you know, there are crises, and we have to deal with Ukraine, and we have to deal with Afghanistan. But let us never forget Afghanistan, because it's been in conflict situation since the late 70s. It's really, when I say long suffering, it's long suffering. We're speaking about decades here, and generations of children who have lost a possibility to a quality education.
Thank you. Ibtisam Azam.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you. Good to see you again. I have first a few follow-ups on Afghanistan. So when you say that the Swedish initiative and the negotiations and it enabled to bring back some of the girls in some schools back, but that's mostly private schools. Am I wrong? Or the schools that are Swedish schools or financed by Sweden, not public schools, if I'm not mistaken. And then also, what about universities? And were you able to get to the root cause why the Taliban reversed their decision the same day where they were supposed to open the schools? Is it more because of division in the between them, or? And I'm asking that because maybe knowing the cause also will help find the solution. And then I have another question about Ukraine and your work to provide for Ukrainian refugees. So you are giving support in which countries neighboring to Ukraine? And what about we heard, I think, Monday from Mr. Griffiths that according to some Ukrainian estimations, there's more than 870,000 Ukrainians who are going back to Ukraine. And most of them are women and children. So are you also working with the Ukrainian authorities when it comes to providing education to internal displaced Ukrainians, or are you working only in neighboring countries? Thank you. I'm sorry for so many questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent questions as well. And I just want to make sure I give you the right figures, which I have somewhere here. But let me start with Afghanistan. the system in Afghanistan is community-based education. And the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, Aga Khan Foundation, UNICEF, and many other organizations, Save the Children, Norwegian Refugee Council, and so forth, have long supported community-based education. Because that's the way the topography and geography of Afghanistan is, actually also a very decentralized country. They are linked to the public school system. There is no, first of all, we do not provide any funding for national execution or on budget to the Taliban. It goes directly to UNICEF, directly to Save the Children, directly to Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. But they are operating and supporting community-based system that is linked to the public system. It could be that some of the schools supported by, or all of the schools actually, according to the statement by the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, all the schools supported by them had reopened, and this was just, I think 2 months ago, reopened the secondary schools for girls in areas where they were providing support. Afghanistan is living off international financing. It does not have its own budget. So everything is public, but it is international assistance that is providing that support. When it comes to Ukraine and why the decision, well, you know, there may be many different answers to that, and I would not like to, unless I was absolutely verified as to why the decision was changed. I think, let us say like this, and this is in every society, there are ways of interpretation, okay? As I said, there are division of opinion within the Taliban movement. And then how do we interpret, you know, our faith, our religion? How do we interpret it? And as I said, we hope that the interpretation be based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because it's actually derived from all world religions. When it comes to Ukraine and Moldova, we are actually, that was our first intervention. That was into Ukraine and to the displaced children in Ukraine right now as we are speaking. And I think there are 3 million children inside Ukraine whose education has been disrupted. And that's why we came in with a very big emergency funding of $5 million. And that was already in March. So we are already in Ukraine investing, working very closely with the Minister of Education of Ukraine. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, I have a meeting together with a few colleagues and partners with the Minister of Education in Ukraine to see how we further can support remote learning for those who have left the country, and what we can do in addition to the $5 million we have contributed through partners who are providing assistance in country. And then Moldova. And the reason we focused on Moldova is that it's the poorest country in Europe, and it's not a member of the EU. Though we know that the EU is also providing support. But normally, Education Cannot Wait do not go into EU countries, or we are focusing on those left furthest behind, sub-Saharan Africa, refugees around the globe, of course, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, the Middle East, and it's not the normal area of work, if you put it that way. However, if there's an armed conflict and a war in Europe, and the poorest country, Moldova, is in need, we will be there. And the same goes for Ukraine. That is not a member of the EU either, but it's receiving support. But still, it's a full-blown war, and we have to be there. That's our mandate.
Thank you. Mr. Abadi?
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. You mentioned some specialized agencies. What about UNESCO, that is par excellence in charge of education? What role has it been playing in alleviating the situation in Moldova?
Well, you know, we are all working on education, and I would say UNESCO is the lead agency on education in the UN system. UNICEF is the lead agency on education in emergencies. UNHCR, the lead agency on refugees, and World Food Program on school feeding. And we are just the fund. We are the catalyst. We bring the advocacy and the funding. to make sure they have what they need. UNESCO, we did not interact with them in Moldova because Moldova is normally, before the crisis, did not have many UN agencies on the ground. The refugee agency had one person in Moldova until the conflict broke out. Now they have escalated and increased it to 80 staff. But normally, Moldova was not high attention country for UN agency or civil society. It was a peaceful, poor, however, country. So I would not be surprised if UNESCO moves in very fast as well, as soon as and are already working with them. But since we are speaking about UNESCO, I must say that they have done fantastic. We work very closely with them on not the least in preparing the Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit during the UN General Assembly. But if you all remember the explosion in Beirut, when big parts of Beirut were destroyed from the explosives in the harbor, I can happily share with you today that thanks to the collaboration and partnership between UNESCO and Education Cannot Wait, UNESCO has repaired every single school that was destroyed and completed that work in Beirut. So I bow to UNESCO for that work.
Thank you. We'll go on screen. Iftikhar Ali, Associated Press of Pakistan. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Steph. Ms. Sherif, you spoke extensively about how your efforts to promote education inside of Afghanistan for the girls. What about millions of Afghans who live outside Afghanistan, especially in Pakistan and Iran, whose numbers are gradually increasing?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question, and Pakistan has hosted Afghan refugees from Afghanistan for decades. And at one point, the Afghan refugees in Pakistan hosted the largest refugee population in the world. And then, of course, they started trickling back. Well, I'm happy to be able to share with you that Education Cannot Wait, together with our partners in Pakistan, the Ministry of Education, UNICEF, UNHR, and many other civil society organizations and UN agencies, we are actually launching a multi-year investment for education in Pakistan. And it's both for refugees, but also for host communities, Pakistani children and youth in their communities, which is always the case, refugees and the host communities. So, yes, indeed, we are present in Afghanistan and provide that support.
Thank you. Stefano?
Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York. The Security Council, I believe in September, passed a resolution where the people of Afghanistan, I mean, the Taliban regime will have to allow the people of Afghanistan that wanted to leave the country. So did you see that after this education crisis, I mean, since the Taliban decided that the girls cannot go to school, are you aware of families that want to leave Afghanistan because they want an education for the girls, and maybe they want to come here in the United States? I asked the U.S. ambassador, so are you going to welcome any Afghani that wants to come here? She said yes. Did you see this? There is any Afghani family that wants to come anywhere in the world to give an education to the girls?
Thank you very much. Well, I didn't physically see it with my own eyes, and I think that the UN Refugee Agency would be able to give you much more factual information on departure of Afghans seeking refuge elsewhere. in order to get an education. But I've seen, of course, Afghan refugees in Pakistan, which hosts 1.5 million Afghan refugees today, refugees on the Greek islands in Europe who fled even before the Taliban in order to create a better life and get an education. So I cannot respond to this, empirically evidence-based because I did not see it. However, it is often a common pull factor. And as I mentioned also, the mothers fleeing from Ukraine, it is a pull factor besides security and your well-being. It is to safeguard the education and the future hope for your children. That's why people flee and become refugees, yes.
A very quick follow-up, but what are your organization, what is ready to do to facilitate, to help Afghani family that today wants to leave Afghanistan to give an education to their girls?
Well, Education Cannot Wait provides investments. We invest funding in education to our colleagues who work in the UN system, to our colleagues in the civil society, non-governmental organizations. We do not transport or facilitate for populations to leave their country. That would be the UN Refugee Agency or IOM who are more involved with that. So we don't operate like that. We provide education in Afghanistan. We invested $36 million and are creating a new multi-year program of $300 million for education in Afghanistan with an emphasis on secondary school for girls. And the programs that we have implemented through UNICEF and other partners since 2018 has reached all our programs, 60% of them were girls. So we work with affirmative action, we leverage funding to increase the number of girls and to promote human rights and gender equality through that. And we support primary schools for girls in Afghanistan today. And depending on where they flee, if they were to flee to Pakistan, yes, they would benefit from Education Cannot Wait's investments there. And as I said, we are also supporting refugees through their work, the civil society organization, UNICEF and UNHCR. On the Greek islands, Afghans who have fled, I think there are over 60 nationalities who have fled trying to get to Europe and who are sitting in those reception centers on the islands, and we are investing in their education.
So I have to say the last follow-up. Would you advise today a family in Afghanistan that want to give an education to their girls to leave the country?
I would absolutely not advise anything of that kind, neither for nor against. This is their decision. All we can do is to provide support to our UN colleagues and civil society to provide education. I don't think we have a right to advise anybody what to do with their life. And if they feel fear, that fear, not even we can feel that. They will know what to do. I must say, I worked with refugees and people suffering conflict and armed conflict for 33 years. And one thing I've learned, and it's actually a Persian poet called Omar Khayyam, he said, "Who are you to teach and who am I to learn? I don't advise. I learn from them."
Thank you. I think we have one more question online. Dulcie, are you able to connect? Dulcie Lembach from Pass Blue. Okay, I think the question she wanted to ask was, are boys allowed to go to school at the secondary level in Afghanistan?
Yes, they are. They are allowed to go to school, and that's where the problem is. We cannot support a gender discriminatory system. We will not. And all our strategic donor partners and member states are absolutely firm on this. We cannot support schools where only boys are allowed if girls are not allowed to go to school. If they want to segregate girls and boys, that's not our business. They do that in boarding schools too. If they want the girls to dress a certain way, well, everyone have their dressing code. But if girls cannot go to school and learn, and boys can, we cannot support such schools. We will only support where girls and boys have equal, inclusive access to go to school. That's the leverage, and it's a human rights-based approach, and that's taken by all our strategic donor partners.
On that note, a very clear note, thank you so much, Yasmine, and it's nice to have you here in person. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you all of you for your great questions. Thank you.